Hello, and welcome back to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. I'm here in the studio with my friends and colleagues.
David Kennedy.
And Red Keating.
And I'm Julie Brown. And today we have a special guest joining us from San Francisco, Vinny Ferraro, who recently was a meditation teacher for me in a year-long course in 2023 for a program called A Year to Live. And he was one of our leaders that guided us through that year. And the program, I think I spoke about it briefly on an episode where I spoke about my own cancer journey and the impact of that program. And so we've invited him to be here with us today. I'm going to just say a little overview about Vinny, and then he can share a little more with us if he wants to. But as I said, he lives in San Francisco. He's been practicing insight meditation since the mid-1990s. He's a guiding teacher of the Big Heart City Sangha in San Francisco, and he leads weekly sitting groups for almost 2 decades. He's a Dharma teacher through Spirit Rock, and he's taught residential retreats at Spirit Rock, Insight Meditation Society. And he currently, as I mentioned, leads the Spirit Rock's Year to Live course. He's also a respected teacher in developing and implementing interventions for at-risk populations, such as leading groups in schools, juvenile halls, and prisons since 1987. And I have just known him as this very warm, welcoming person that guided. I think there were over 600 of us that started in the course from all over the world. And it was amazing how we built this community month by month. And we built a real intimacy in both our large and small groups. So I'm really delighted that you agreed to be here with us, Vinny. Welcome.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, David. Thank you, Red. Yeah, I'm interested to see where this goes.
So are we.
Yes. Well, I'm really fascinated, Vinny, with obviously when we meet people for the first time, very soon in the conversation, there's kind of, oh, what do you work at? What do you do? How do you spend your life? And I'm sure that introduces a lot of interesting conversation when you tell people where it is you spend your time. But how did you get into this? What is it that drew you into this area of dealing with? And I know the meditation piece is significant, but around this idea of our own mortality.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I guess I was raised with a lot of death. I was just in that world, I mean, in kind of a more dramatic sense, I was born into cycles of addiction, incarceration, violence. So when you're born into that world, there's lots of kinds of incarceration. There's lots of kinds of death. And so I was always searching for something to help me transcend that. And in the beginning, it was dangerous behavior, as you can imagine, right? Drugs, excitement, even violence, right? Yeah, I would never consider myself a violent person, but these kind of dangerous behaviors were a way to transcend the world that I was living in. I was really seeking to be delivered from the moment, not to the moment, right? A lot of times meditation practice delivers us to the moment. Mm-hmm. I was seeking the opposite. And I guess in that way, we could say there's a lot of different kinds of painkillers, right? Like all drugs could be considered painkillers, right? Whether that was their aim or not. So I just needed to, I really wanted to opt out of this life. And I didn't think I'd make it to 20. And most of the people around me would agree. So then when I did find a new life, I got sober at about 1987, and 20 years old, 110 pounds. I was not long for this world, and through that recovery and then finding some service, they started talking about meditation, And I just hadn't really heard that word. I didn't grow up in a community of well-being or health or even Eastern thought. So that kind of drew my attention. And I said, well, what is this thing? What are they talking about? And that got me interested in meditation. And so that was like, maybe by 1990, I was interested. And then by 95, I would consider myself a student, sitting long retreats, studying in Asia, taking a teacher. And yeah, I got really lucky that my teachers all held service in a high regard. And I did too. And maybe that's why I was drawn to them. But, being in the world, not just grunting off to a cave somewhere and seeking my own salvation, but trying to figure out how can we bring these practices of dealing with life and death and suffering to the people that need it most. And for me, that was people that were on the front lines, whether it was death, drugs, prison. So those have been the keystones, the places where I put most of my attention.
Where do you think the birthplace of that desire to serve comes from? Where did it come from for you?
Red, it's like so many things. There's a paradox there. When I had about a week sober, my father had asked me to come to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting and share some of my story. And as I sat there and shared a little bit, I started realizing that this was really the first time that I felt like I had value in my whole life. I didn't feel like I could be a part of something good. I was part of the criminal world, part of the shadow world. And so here was this moment of like, no, you have something to offer. You can be a part of something beautiful. It was a jarring effect. And it was the realization that I had survived something and that I had something to offer. So it really turned me on. And then we started going into prisons together. My father had done a long time in prison. And so we were speaking together, and I started feeling this sense like, wow, there's something here, something very enlivening and even redemptive. Yeah.
Well, you've got me thinking about, I'm going to go off on a tangent here, I'm not sure, but that concept of burden, when we've talked about it before in the past, and that sense of someone feeling like a burden because they are putting someone else in a position to have to care for them, but how the role of servant can bring so much to a person's life, so much value to a person's life. Is the underside or the opposite side of that concept of burden is that it actually has value, right?
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, I could say Narcotics Anonymous saved my life, back in the late 80s, but I could say that service gave me a life worth living. There was something way more important at stake, that if I hadn't found that peace, I can't imagine me sticking around, even the program,
right,
even the thing that had saved my life, because, I just really undervalued my own presence.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't think anybody should have to endure my presence, even myself, right? So when you hold that low opinion of yourself, it's a hard burden to bear. Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, here we are, I reached out to you months ago thinking how delighted we were that you agreed to share your presence with us here. And so here we are, right? A few decades later.
It's true. And it didn't take that long, but I got to tell you that it was not always like this. And that's beautiful, because that means that transformation is possible, right? It actually doesn't matter the conditions, not so much. We tend to really focus on conditions, trying to get the conditions just right for this life or for this child or for, our work. And then we come to understand a bit more about transcending conditions, so I don't have to be so worried about all my preferences being met,
I'm sitting here just deeply moved, Vinny, to be honest, but realizing too that this growth in your life is possible in the midst of death being there all the time. Like, I think, we live in a culture that tries to put death off in a whole different place so we don't have to think about it or talk about it because we're afraid of it interfering with life. And yet here you are growing up in a culture of death for your own, not knowing whether you're going to live. And yet it's in the midst of death that you find life and are able not just to put death away and then continue to live, but allow death to be part of what you continue to live in.
Yeah, really well said, David. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was like the perfect confluence of like crack, AIDS, losing my mom at a young age. There was all of these things, and it's like, yeah, if you can survive this, you'll really have something to offer.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's really true, right? I feel like I'm the luckiest person on the planet. Nobody's more surprised than I am that I'm still here and, I have some, success in my life. I'm really, really surprised, because, yeah, I think like if you were to, I didn't really go to high school, but if you did take a poll, I'd be least likely to be alive,
Right.
I was one of those, I don't know if you ever heard the African proverb. It said, if the young are not initiated into a village, they'll burn it down just to feel its warmth, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that was me. I didn't have a sense of belonging, right? So then you search for it. You either you self-exile in a certain kind of way, and then you find the value of exile. Because homecoming doesn't mean shit unless there's exile. So then this whole sense that meditation practice can really, you can find a home within yourself. You can build that kind of landing pad for yourself. Really, really exciting for someone that's always felt like the runny-nosed orphan with my nose pressed up against the glass.
And so then I'm hearing that, and I'm thinking, fast forward to now you're leading this program, A Year to Live, which is really a landing pad, if I could use your words, for people to really start examining their own kind of death anxiety, existential angst, what it means to, there were many people in the program that were grieving really, like you could just, we could feel it in our bodies as we all kind of sat together. And so then here you come, here you are so many years later from all you've said, and you're creating this landing pad for people to now start to explore that space of death and life for others.
Yeah. Isn't it always the case though? Isn't it always the case that we're seeking what we didn't have? We're seeking to provide what we didn't have, right? Because we know the value of it because of the absence, right? Without that, we don't know it. And it's just like, I could be doing anything. There's 10,000 things to do in the world, right? But it was most meaningful to me just because of, that absence, Yeah.
So the course, not that we're here necessarily just to talk about the course, but it's based on this, one of the undergrounding pinnings, I guess, of the program is based on the A Year to Live book by Stephen Levine, which was written back in the 90s, I think. Yeah. And the subtitle of that book is How to Live This Year as If It Were Your Last. So in the program, we talk about, we approach it like this is our last year to live. And it takes us through month after month, we do a life review. We look at our creating a will. We look at creating preparations around the rituals and traditions we would like to do. And I think there's tremendous value in it. Of course, I signed up for it, so I didn't need to be convinced. But I certainly loved walking through it over the course of the year with the people, especially in my small group. But why do you think it's important, Vinny, that we're doing this? And what do you think is drawing people, hundreds of people every year, to engage in this kind of year-long practice of a year to live?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the first one is a little easier for me to answer. I think about my life, everything that I had been on the run from. Things tend to get bigger the more we run from them, right?
Mm.
At least my experience, me trying to get away from my anxiety made me more anxious.
That's
right?
how it goes, doesn't it?
Yeah. So that which we resist persists, as they say, right? So here we are in this death-denying culture. Many of us live in the same culture. And, it's really the only limo ride they're ever going to take for many people. And it's just like, holy shit, man, that is tragic, And so there's this undercurrent that we know it's going to happen, but, it's all smoke and mirrors, weekend at Bernie's, And so when a course comes up that says, okay, let's turn and look at this, and my teacher, Stephen, was such a courageous teacher he had penned many books, right? At least a dozen books, worked with death and dying on the front lines of the AIDS epidemic, cancer, hospice, just decades and decades, him and Andrea. And so he was really my first teacher, first through his books and then through his direct teachings. And then when this came out, we started doing it immediately because we're like, okay, let's see what this is. And we were a bit dramatic about it. We were digging holes and laying in them. You know what I mean? A lot of ex-junkies, we like the extremes,
We're going to push things to the real extreme here.
Yeah, man. Let's get weird, And so we were into it in that way. And then I started offering it in my little Sangha in San Francisco. And I seen that people were really into it. Like, it'd be smaller groups, 80, 90 people. And then we started doing it online through Spirit Rock maybe 5 years ago. Yeah, right before the pandemic hit. We were doing 150 people in person, then 100 online, just to see what would that be like. And then the pandemic hit in March. And we're just like, okay, I guess we're all online. And, I never really, I don't know. I don't like to record my stuff. I like to be with who I'm with in the room. And I don't want to throw my Dharma talks or my courses on top of the pile that's already there, because there's a lot of great things have already been said. But then when the pandemic hit and I realized, oh, hey, man, what if this wasn't about you for just like 1 minute? Like, what would that be like if it wasn't about your preferences? Like, kind of shy, introverted, I want to be with who's in the room. And then I saw the accessibility. Oh, wow, people could do this that are in hospice, that have an acute prognosis and don't happen to live in San Francisco, right? And I got to see all of these different time zones, all these different countries start showing up. And I was like, wow. As usual, kicking and screaming toward my own liberation, Yeah, so I think the online accessibility really opened up, and then it started becoming larger groups. Yeah.
I found the life review to be, well, there's a couple components. We'll get into the 5 remembrances, but the life review component of the program where, and I mean, we don't need to be in a program to engage in any of this, but just that idea of taking time to reflect. For me, it was just like journaling 10 or 15 minutes a day, just to reflect on things around my past, reviewing some regrets, some remorse, and in many places, maybe I'm not even going to make amends for that, but just to hold my remorse for it, hold my blessings for those people. I found that to have incredible value, and there was a lot of, and that is work that a lot of people do sometimes during the palliative process. But I think there's incredible value for us to be doing it at any time, and not in this. And the course was really good to say, not in this way where we're becoming beleaguered with ourselves, where we're beating ourselves up and having all of these woulda, coulda, shouldas. It's really just like standing back and just allowing ourselves to be reflective.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous value in just kind of getting our house in order. I mean, I was lucky enough to be able to sit bedside at hospice. And you don't really want to do that kind of work when you're on a morphine and Demerol drip, right? It's not conducive to clarity. So it's like, okay, let's take this time to see how do I relate to the past in all these relationships. It's not really like an inventory.
No.
Of all the contemplation of all the events and, right and wrong. But it's more of like, let me just take stock of any residual feelings that I'm carrying forward, right? Can I just look back and see, oh, wow, maybe there's some forgiveness needed. Maybe there's some gratitude. Maybe it's a mixture, right? So it's like, can I just presence these, the 1,000 relationships or the 100 or whatever it is, right? And see what does it feel like in the body as I recollect. And it may not even have to do with anything about the person, but what feelings still remain in me? And how do I make peace with that? Yeah, because that's what we want. I want to be at peace with those relationships. And many times they don't end like that, right? Maybe we didn't have the wherewithal, we didn't have the maturity at the time. But can we go back and say, okay, is there anything that's been left incomplete? Does that make sense?
It does.
I'm interested, Vinny, when you've connected around the world in so many different ways, both as a student and as a teacher. What's your observation, or what have you learned around other cultural approaches to death and dying? To how do people come to this universal experience from various ways of life?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty broad question. I've been lucky. I don't do drugs, and I didn't have a kid till I was 50, so I got to go to like 35 countries, right? Just traveling, sometimes teaching, but always studying in some way because I'm interested in the human experience, right? So what is it in Japan or India or Peru, right? So all of these different cultures, yeah, most of them have a much more mature view of this cycle of living and dying. Maybe most of them are living in a more natural kind of context, right? So Julie, you mentioned that I live in San Francisco. I don't anymore.
Oh.
I moved down to the Santa Cruz Mountains when I had my son about 5-6 years now. And so I live in this very natural setting, and there's hardly a day that goes by that we don't see something dead, right? Just, we live on a few acres and there's lots of animals. And so my son, he's been to funerals already. He's been to wakes. He's been, he sees death as a part of life a bit more than I certainly was, even though it was a part of my life. The kind of denial of it, the dressing it up with makeup and hiding it behind, limousines and all that stuff. I don't think other cultures are as far away from it as we are in the U.S. or even in North America, maybe.
And how do you think that being far away, what's the change? What's the difference? I hear there's going to be some anxiety, but what do you see the effect of that maybe being farther away is?
On the cultures that I visited?
No, on North American culture.
Mm.
If we're farther away than maybe some other cultures that are a bit closer to that being a natural cycle, life and death, well, what's the impact for North America?
Well, I think, I don't know, but I think that we can live in a very disembodied state, right? It's there's so much focus on this body, this face, these Botox. You know what I mean? Like all the things that kind of make me feel like, okay, I am this body, and even that I live a short distance from. Right. So there's a way that there's a disembodied state, even though we're at the gym, we're at the surgeon. So everything that comes up against that. Yeah, there can just be a denial of death if it's hidden away. So that means it's always a surprise. It's always, let's like, I can't believe this. You know what I mean? And there supposedly was this meeting between, I think it was Krishna and Arjuna. Yeah, maybe in the Ramayana, the great Indian epic. And they're talking, and he says, like, I know you've seen all the worlds. What's the strangest thing you've ever seen? And he says, right here. He goes, these people are surrounded by death, but nobody think it's going to happen to them. So strange, right? So I think other cultures have a jump on us in that sense,
Right.
where if they're seeing it more, they realize that this is going to happen to them. And then we start living like that, right? Because if we don't live like that, there is so much regret on the deathbed. There's so much anxiety about it because we have taken ourselves to be these bodies.
Right.
Yeah. Really, really heartbreaking, when you start seeing it all slip away. But then there's like I said, the medicines, and then just the anxiety, that this surprise, and then the unknown, because we haven't investigated it at all, for ourselves. Right. Yeah.
One of the things that helped me, that was introduced in the program, to not live so far away from death. Well, cancer taught me how to not live so far away from death, but was the 5 remembrances. And I have worked with them and have shared it with so many people, Vinny. And I was wondering if you'd take a few moments just to introduce us to the 5 remembrances.
Yeah, I would love to. It's funny because they come on so strong.
Oh,
Yeah. So I guess, I'll just repeat them, right? So the 5 remembrances, basically it's the foundation of Buddhism. So it would be, I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. I'm of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. I'm of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death, right? So the first 3, 2,600 years, and they've stood basically undisputed, right? There's no mature person is going to argue with any of those, right? Then we get to the 4th one, and it kind of ups the ante a bit. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. That's a hard pill to swallow. Again, hard to argue with. And yet, we don't generally live our lives in accordance with that reality. Mm-hmm. And then the 5th one, which is basically about karma, right? Another thing that hard to dispute, and yet it seems to escape our daily orientation. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground on which I stand. And so, seen through the lens of karma, in Buddhism, we believe that each moment conditions the next, right? Very simple. We're not talking about other lives. We're not getting metaphysical. We're just saying how we do this moment matters.
Mm-hmm.
It matters. It matters, my intention for it, and then my actions. And then there's the fruit of my actions, right? So I love that because it reminds us that, I don't know, in my more stressful, difficult moments of suffering, I tend toward nihilism. Like nothing matters. Doesn't matter. Everything is, messed up, And so I like that one in particular because it reminds me, no, it actually, how we live matters and how we do this moment matters.
Mm-hmm.
So can I have faith in that kind of lawful unfolding? And I guess when we first hear them, they sound so daunting, but there's something in us that remembers they're true.
Mm-hmm.
There's some part of our marrow, you know what I mean? That that says, yes, yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to keep them in the forefront of our mind so we can live a life with integrity, right? And integrity really means not lying to ourselves about who we are and what we are, the nature of our life, right? So that's what I like about them, is that they can have a calibrating effect on my integrity. Because when I'm saying them, I say them in the morning, I can go through my day with them in the forefront of my mind, because in the places where I'm not living like that, there's a bit of a straightening of my posture. There's like, oh, that's right, okay. So I appreciate them, and I know people, paste them on their mirrors and they recite them twice a day, and I think they have an incredible value because they talk about the three seals, right? The three seals in Buddhism are impermanence, not self, and then just the dissatisfaction, right? The suffering, right? So I like that because they really kind of include those, not perfect, not permanent, not personal. That's the way we could understand the three seals. Anyway, yeah, a little bit about that.
I think that's that impermanence, and the other word, the first time I saw them was acceptance, like just feeling this enormous of, like, as you said, it's like my body remembered that, oh yes, that is all true. And at times when I can feel it either in myself or I'm working with a client and I can feel all of that resistance, it's just to come back to that truth of, but I am of the nature. I'm of the nature to die. I am of the nature to have ill health, that I will be separated, right, from those I love. It's just like coming back to this truth, and not in this, it's just a truth. It just is. It just is. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. And in that is that acceptance piece that we are often so hard clinging and resisting, and we put all this energy into make that which is true not true. And so there it comes back to use your word previously, like that landing pad of go, and there we are. There's our truth. I am of the nature to die.
Yeah, it really softens the resistance.
It does.
It does. Resistance is so natural for us. And I think the ego itself is just a contraction.
That's
away
right.
from the interdependent nature of reality. And so the ego continues to fortify and separate from truth and say, no, this is me, this is mine. Y'all are out there, I'm in here by myself. And so how do we meet that contraction that's so natural, right? And so resistance to the fact that we will be separated from what we love, the fact that people do change, the fact that, even the impermanence, right? All that is dear to me, right? Is of the nature to change, right? So there's the impermanence. Then the next one, right? The second one, anyway, I don't want to get too deep into it because I'm really a Buddhist nerd, I can geek out on these things. But I guess the other thing I want to say about it before we move on is there's something incredibly tenderizing about them as well, because it's not just us. It's everyone in the world. So there's a natural tenderness in the way of compassion that arises as we look at the world. I look at my little boy, 7 years old, and I know this is true for him, as it's true for all beings, no matter what our wish is, no matter how sincerely we wish it to be otherwise. I am of the nature. So there's something about it that has an equalizing effect. Millionaires, folks experiencing homelessness, it doesn't matter. We are all bound to the same laws.
It sort of makes our resistance futile, doesn't it? I'm thinking
That's
about
the line I was thinking of.
The concept. I've got so many lines going through my head, and not the least of which is George Costanza, from Seinfeld, when he chooses to do the opposite, which is, run toward all the things that he thinks are wrong, his life turns around. But that concept, this concept of our resistance, our denial or our unwillingness to contemplate our own mortality or accept and live inside that, I think we take that on as protective initially, and we think that that's what's going to get us through, and it's a bit of an armor. And then through conversations in like this, or when the time comes when we actually are confronted with our own mortality, we realize that protection, it wasn't made of steel and iron. It might be made of paper. And then we end up in a position where we are incredibly anxious and surprised. I think, Vinny, you said, it's such a surprise all the time. And we've heard that before, where people who have been, maybe they've been in a state of dying for a very long time, and maybe they're well into their senior years, and then someone goes like, my 95-year-old grandmother died. We were so shocked. And there is a shock, absolutely. When that line gets crossed and you realize you can't go back the other way, there is a shock. But that protection dissolves somehow, and what we thought what we were using to take care of ourselves actually kind of turns on us. That's what you've been sort of sparking in my mind. I don't know if you have any comment about that, but
yeah, that's really, really the story of my life, this armoring, and it makes sense for those of us that lived through trauma. We're really trying to figure out how to be safe, right? So that kind of armoring was really in service to my own protection and safety, right? Yeah. But then you're in here by yourself with the very traumas you're trying to escape, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think there's a time that it's necessary, and then there's a way that our freedom really depends on us softening that armor and allowing it to melt away slowly in a safe way. And I thought my heart was something I was supposed to hide from the world. Then, I met my teachers and started doing the practice, and they're like, no, it's your gift to the world. Right. You have something to offer. And it was just like, huh? And then we start realizing, like, okay, I can take this off and I can put it on when it needs to be, right? If I'm not in a safe place, there's a way, if we can lean on the words of Winnicott, that safe holding environment, right? So it's not like I'm going to be a mess in aisle 3 in the supermarket. That's not an appropriate place to de-armor, right? But
Yep.
it's like I can have a way to compartmentalize things, but then when is the true up? When do I actually spend time with those things and make space and hold them? My son, he started school, and I remember going to meet his teacher, and I was just like, okay, I want to go meet her. And, I didn't want to figure out what her specialty was, who she studied with. I just wanted to know if she was friendly. If she's friendly, he'll feel safe enough to learn. That's, and that's what we're trying to do in here. We're trying to make it a friendly environment. And, I talk to a lot of people, and that's not what comes factory stock. You know what I mean?
Right. Yep. Yeah. No, I appreciate your acknowledgement that sometimes the armor is good and required and needed, and needs to sort of be honored. And then the time to be vulnerable and take it off also needs to be honored.
That's exactly right. I mean, I teach in prisons, and I teach people that have a certain designation, right? Because they classify people, if you can imagine that. And I generally work with people that are classified, inclined toward radical violence, right? That's who they think meditation might help. Okay. And so in there, we have an environment that is not safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
But can we, for this hour and a half, couple times a week, can we make it safe in this room?
Right.
You know what I mean? Can we step out of the unit and into this classroom and define how we want to be together? And it's quite beautiful. But we know what we're sending them back into as well. So we have some rituals. Okay, we're going to be vulnerable. Okay, we're going to close it up. Yeah.
Right.
And I think I'm sitting here thinking we're all in our own prisons that way, where that armor never gets a chance or a safe place in which to do that. But you don't have to be in a literal prison to find those walls.
Indeed. I mean, I said one of the first sentences I said here was, there are many kinds of incarcerations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Vinny, for people who may listen to this episode and are introduced to the 5 Remembrances for the first time, what would you offer to people about how inviting them in, how to work with them?
Well, I would say recite them twice a day for a month. Just see what it feels like to start the day and end the day with these in the forefront of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And they will bear fruit. Even if it's that, oh man, I could sign off on every one of these, but number 4, and then we see where our work is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then we see, where am I attached? Because attachment brings suffering.
That's right.
Right? So we want to see, where is there the clinging? Where's the aversion? Where's the resistance to these truths that in our logical minds we can say, all right, these are hard to argue with. But where in my heart, where in my body just pushes against that 1 or that 2, right? And then we can see, okay, is there a way for me to live in more truth around the nature of reality, nature of life? Yeah. Because I'm of the nature of all of these things. Ask me about other cultures, right? And the death denying culture, how does that put us further away, right? One of my teachers, it was Buddhist Bhikkhu. He said, what we're doing with meditation practice is trying to give back to nature what we mistakenly appropriated as our own. So we're just trying to be a part of nature, right? It seems like I'm walking through nature, but I am nature, right? It's raining here in California. The creek is rising, the mud is sliding. This is it's of the nature to do that. Same with myself. Oh, wow, there's a lot of stress right now. My father-in-law is having a difficult time staying alive and kind of considering options. And it's like, oh, wow, so we are of the nature to take that on a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the ecosystem that is our little Ferraro household is enduring something difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a bit more tenderness, a little bit more, some less patience sometimes, right? I am of the nature to take this on.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we see ourselves through that lens of that I am just of the nature to be like this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it kind of can soften some of the personal blame. It's just like, no, this is just nature playing itself out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if we can make room for that and kind of take that into consideration, that not personal piece, it makes all the difference in the world to me. Because, you know, it's always been like, what's the problem with Vinny?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like from juvenile delinquent to all these different bad decisions I had made, I was just like, as we orient toward ourselves as a problem, it's very unhelpful. Really, really kind of, you know, it's like we blame ourselves for being the way we are, which is not helpful in terms of transcendence, in terms of transformation, and in terms of actually meeting that with some kind of heart quality.
And I think, just listening there and realizing and coming back to that armor piece is we've made death the enemy in a way that we exclude that reality from our life in a way that keeps us from that holistic approach. And I think that as long as we see death as that enemy that we cannot engage as part of our living, then we really are at a huge disadvantage, but I think a real struggle and suffering. And I think I remember, Red, you introduced us through those pieces a few years ago to the terror management theory and the whole idea that people will create whatever they need to avoid the terror of death in their life. And listening to you, Vinny, this is the other way. This is a way not to have a terror of what it is, but to see it as part of who we are. And that as we engage in that, what difference does it make in our life right this minute in terms of who I am, how I live in this world? And rather than seeing whenever death happens as the enemy of me, it's simply part of who I am.
Yeah, I mean, it informs the preciousness too. You know, we seem like we're living a life of infinity, and we're not, you know? And so it doesn't have to be this jarring wake-up call. It can be this kind of like maturing and saying like, wow, I don't know how many more times I'm going to play catch with my son. I don't know. I have no idea. And that informs how I live today. Not on my deathbed sometime in the someday, but like right here, right now. And we start really sensing the value of presence instead of just being lost in so much time travel. I mean, how much of our days are we forfeiting for what might be or what was, you know, and we just, you know, toggle back and forth between this time travel, and there's hardly any presence. And it's like, this is the only time I could actually be free. It's the only time I matter that if I love my son or not is right now. That don't matter if I love him in 3 months, 6 months, if I'm going to be around. It doesn't even matter. You were never here anyway. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, how can this wake us up to this preciousness? I think it was, who was it? Yeah, it was Herman Hesse. He said, you know, if a thing, if a rainbow were to stay a rainbow for eternity, I would look at it with a colder eye. That's what he said. I would look at it with a colder eye. I could look at that any day. You know? Well, it doesn't have to be today, right? But because these things are fleeting, There's something in it that just feels so precious about being present, about commandeering these thoughts and having some practice that delivers me to the moment and not from it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know we need to start to wrap up and be aware of your time. Red, you had a question or
Oh no,
comment?
yeah, more. I'm sitting here thinking about a death-denying culture, and really, what the outcome is a life almost denying culture. Because if I am if I'm a part of nature, and everything in nature is finite and finds its end, and I'm denying that, then how am I denying life? How am I denying living? And that, like you say, then maybe I'm looking not to live in the moment, but looking for the promise of moments to come, or the promise of moments expected that I don't even have right now. But I'm banking on that somehow, and as a result, not living today, not experiencing life to its fullest now, because I am pretending like death is not it's not that shadow that I was born with, that's traveled with me my entire life. If I just don't look at it, it'll go away, and it doesn't. And I just think, wow, that's a denial of self too.
That's right, bro. Yeah, I mean, James Baldwin, a great writer, he put it, he's like, perhaps that's the whole root of our problem, the human trouble. We will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, steeples, mosques, races, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, which is the only fact we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow.
We are of the nature.
That's right. Yeah. And when we're on the run from our death, we're on the run from our life, right? You're right.
When we're on the run from our death, we're on the run from our life.
Yeah.
Who said that?
I think it was
I think you
Baldwin.
just did.
No. Baldwin said that too.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know what it is to be on the run from my life.
I think we all know.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know if we all know.
Maybe. Maybe. In our own ways, right?
Yeah.
Some people it was getting the gold stars, right? I went the other direction. But it's still no less running, right? Yeah, 1,000 ways to run.
Yeah, getting the gold stars, the should life, the pursue this, produce that, look a certain way. Yeah.
Yeah, do it all right, and hopefully I'll be saved.
Wow, this feels hard to wrap up, doesn't it, guys?
Yeah. Yes, it sure
I think
does.
it just has to end at some point.
It does.
Everything must end.
And we have to realize it's natural.
Vinny, is there anything else you'd like to add or comment on?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'll say is nothing as bad as we ever think it's going to be. Like the things that I've been able to look at in my life that I never thought were possible. They had nothing to do with reality. My projections of them. So it was looking at death or just meeting anxiety with compassion, or I was chained to be afraid of the dark. Yeah, I used to fall off the bed a lot when I was a kid. And so my father, who's a real tough guy, real, lots of time in prison and just a biker, he told me when I was about 5, he goes, the devil lives under your bed. So don't hang off, because he could grab your arm. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, very effective. I never fell off the bed again. I didn't sleep well for about 30 years. And I ripped open a lot of shower curtains. You know what I mean? I looked in the closet a bunch of times. And then finally, I was on a meditation retreat. Actually, I had Spirit Rock doing a month long. And I was like, okay, I can't live like this no more. And so I started sleeping under the bed, and I unplugged the lamp, so I couldn't get to it too quickly, and I was just laying there, and I was like, just take me, whatever it is, Couple nights, nothing happened. Yeah. It's like, wow, we live our whole lives being on the run from these stories, these ideas, these projections, these fears. And then we look and it's just a whole big nothing. It's like, wow, I wish somebody would have inspired that exploration decades earlier, but I probably wouldn't have been able to hear it. So, you might have people that are listening to your podcast today thinking, I'm going to get to that. Yeah, the sooner the better. You can do it, especially if you have community. That's made this whole life bearable for me, is to just have people that I can really share with, that I can be supported by, that I can be known by, that sense of belonging. And it could be a church or a mosque or a monastery. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we feel that sense of being known and that belonging and that support. So I would say, the sooner the better.
Well, thank you, Vinny.
Thank you.
I have, it has been a very wonderful, wonderful time. And I can't express the personal piece of this that has been so deep for me. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, y'all. I'm sure lots of people are getting their needs met in a way that they don't, because y'all have taken this on and have provided so much for people to kind of consider around these topics. So thank you, and thanks for the invitation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, to be continued in ways we can't imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough. Music by Paradise Garage. Technical support provided by Sean Heikert. What Now is recorded at the Thin Spaces Studio. You can find more episodes of What Now for free on most major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, and Overcast. If you want to support us, please follow and leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And please tell your friends. It truly does make a difference.